Long ago, before many settlers came, the Great Plains of America were a wild and beautiful place. Here, the Lakota people lived. They were a strong and proud group, with a way of life that honored the earth and sky. Their homes were teepees, easy to move as they followed the great herds of buffalo across the wide open land. The buffalo gave them everything: food, clothing, and even tools. The Lakota people believed that all things in nature were connected. The sun was their father, and the earth was their mother. They spoke of Mitakuye Oyasin, which means all my relations, showing how they saw themselves as part of a big family with every plant, animal, and person. Their traditions were rich with stories, songs, and dances that taught their children about courage, honesty, and respect. Elders shared wisdom around crackling fires, passing down lessons from generation to generation. Hunting, gathering, and spiritual ceremonies filled their days. The rhythm of their lives was tied to the changing seasons, a harmony that had existed for hundreds of years. This deep connection to their land and their ways made them who they were. This peaceful way of life, however, could not last forever. As time passed, whispers of new people traveling west grew louder among the Lakota. Soon these whispers turned into sights: strange wagons with big white covers, pulled by oxen, slowly making their way across the plains. These were the white settlers, looking for new lands, gold, and a fresh start. They didn't understand the Lakota's deep bond with the earth, seeing the vast plains as empty space to be claimed and farmed. With the settlers came the U.S. Army. Their job was to protect the new travelers and to make sure the land was safe for them. But to the Lakota, this meant soldiers on their sacred hunting grounds, chasing away the buffalo and cutting down trees. Fences started to appear, blocking paths that the Lakota had used for generations. The air, once filled with the calls of animals and the sounds of Lakota ceremonies, now sometimes carried the crack of rifles and the rumble of wagon wheels. Conflicts began to spark like dry prairie grass catching fire. A small argument over a hunting ground might turn into a big fight. The Lakota saw their home shrinking and their traditions threatened as more and more outsiders poured onto their beloved plains. The harmony they had known for so long was slowly being broken. As the clashes grew more frequent and fierce, the U.S. government decided on a new plan. They wanted to solve the problem by moving Native American tribes, including the Lakota, onto special pieces of land called reservations. These reservations were often much smaller than the lands the Lakota had roamed for centuries, and they were far away from their sacred places and traditional hunting grounds. The idea was that if Native Americans lived in one fixed place, they could be watched more easily and taught to live like white settlers. This change was like tearing a bird from the sky and putting it in a small cage. The Lakota, who had always followed the buffalo, now found themselves stuck in one spot. Their tipis, once moved with the seasons, became more permanent or were replaced by small wooden houses. The buffalo, their main source of food and life, were nearly all gone, hunted by settlers and soldiers. The government promised to provide food and supplies, but these often arrived late, were not enough, or were of poor quality. Children were sent to schools far from home, where they were made to cut their long hair and forbidden to speak their own language. Everything that made the Lakota who they were, their freedom, their ceremonies, their connection to the vast plains, was taken away or deeply challenged. Life on the reservation was hard, filled with hunger, sickness, and a profound sadness for their lost way of life. Life on the reservations was filled with hardship and despair. The Lakota felt lost, their old ways slipping away like sand through fingers. But even in the darkest times, hope can bloom. Around this time, a new spiritual movement began to spread among many Native American tribes, bringing a flicker of light to their troubled hearts. It was called the Ghost Dance. The Ghost Dance was started by a Paiute prophet named Wovoka, who had a vision. He taught that if Native Americans danced this special dance and followed certain rules, the white settlers would disappear, the buffalo would return, and their ancestors would come back to life. The land would become green and abundant once more, and Native Americans would live in peace and happiness, just as they had before. It was a message of renewal and a return to their traditional life, a powerful dream for people who had lost so much. The ghost dance was not about fighting with guns. It was about prayer, peace, and hope through spiritual power. People painted their faces, wore special shirts, and danced for hours, sometimes days, until they fell into a trance, hoping to see visions of the future. For the Lakota, who had suffered greatly, the ghost dance offered a way to believe in a better tomorrow and to reconnect with their spiritual roots, even on the harsh reservations. It gave them a reason to keep going, a shared dream to hold on to. While the ghost dance brought comfort and a sense of unity to the Lakota, it stirred up very different feelings among the white settlers and the U.S. Army. They saw the dances, the special shirts, and the visions not as prayers for peace but as a sign of war. News of the ghost dance spread, often twisted and exaggerated, creating fear. People heard that Native Americans were gathering in large groups, dancing strange dances, and preparing for an uprising. The U.S. Army commanders, already uneasy about controlling the reservations, worried that the ghost dance would cause a rebellion. They didn't understand that the dance was about spiritual renewal, not fighting. The ghost shirts worn by the dancers, which they believed would protect them from bullets, were seen by the soldiers as proof of warlike intentions. They feared that the Lakota were planning to leave the reservations and take back their old lands. This misunderstanding grew bigger and bigger, like a snowball rolling downhill. Instead of trying to learn about the ghost dance and its peaceful message, the Army listened to the frightened whispers of settlers and their own fears. This led them to believe that strong action was needed to stop what they saw as a dangerous movement. Their fear, built on not understanding, would soon lead to terrible consequences. The growing fear among the U.S. Army meant that soldiers were sent to the reservations, making the Lakota even more nervous. Many Lakota leaders, like Sitting Bull, were seen as troublemakers because they supported the ghost dance or simply held onto their traditional ways. In December 1890, soldiers went to arrest Sitting Bull, believing he was encouraging the ghost dance movement too much. A struggle broke out, and Sitting Bull was tragically killed. This terrible event made the Lakota people even more afraid. After Sitting Bull's death, a group of Lakota, led by Chief Spotted Elk, sometimes called Bigfoot, decided to leave their reservation. They were not trying to start a fight. They were simply trying to escape the soldiers and find a safe place. They wanted to join other Lakota groups who were also trying to avoid conflict. This group included many women, children, and old people, all seeking peace and safety. They traveled slowly through the cold winter landscape, hoping to reach the Pine Ridge Agency, where they believed they would be safe. Their journey was one of desperation, a quiet flight from the growing tensions and the shadow of the U.S. Army. They just wanted to be left alone, to practice their beliefs, and live without fear. But the Army was watching, and their path was about to cross with a fate none of them could have imagined. Chief Spotted Elk's band, tired and cold, finally made camp near Wounded Knee Creek on December 28, 1890. They believed they were close to safety, but the Army was already aware of their movements. That evening, soldiers from the U.S. 7th Cavalry Regiment, the same regiment that had been defeated at the Battle of Little Bighorn years earlier, found them. The soldiers surrounded the Lakota camp, their rifles glinting in the pale winter light. The next morning, December 29th, the air was bitter cold and thick with tension. The soldiers, numbering around 500, placed their big Hotchkiss guns on a hill overlooking the camp. These powerful cannons could fire many shots very quickly. The Lakota, about 350 people, mostly women, children, and elderly men, were ordered to gather in the center of their camp. Chief Spotted Elk, who was very sick with pneumonia, was there, wrapped in blankets. The Army commander demanded that the Lakota give up all their weapons. He wanted every rifle, every knife, everything that could be used to fight. The Lakota people began to hand over some old broken guns and a few knives. They were scared, but they wanted to show they meant no harm. However, the soldiers believed more weapons were hidden, making them even more suspicious and ready for trouble. The demand for weapons was met with fear and confusion. The Lakota had already given up many of their old guns, but the soldiers were still not satisfied. They began searching the Lakota men, roughly pulling at their clothing. In this tense moment, a deaf Lakota man named Black Coyote refused to give up his rifle. He said he had paid a lot for it and didn't want to hand it over. Some say he couldn't hear the commands. Others believe he simply cherished his weapon. What happened next is a moment forever clouded by terror and differing stories. As soldiers tried to take Black Coyote's rifle, it went off. Was it an accident? Was it a struggle? No one knows for sure, and the exact reason for that first shot is still debated today. But in that instant, the air exploded. The single gunshot, sharp and sudden, ripped through the cold morning stillness. It was like a spark in a dry forest. Both the Lakota people and the U.S. soldiers reacted with immediate panic. The Lakota, fearing they were under attack, scattered. The soldiers, thinking they were being fired upon, began to shoot. Chaos erupted, turning a tense standoff into a horrifying storm of bullets and cries. The misunderstanding and fear that had been building for weeks now broke loose in a terrible, uncontrolled burst of violence. The single shot ignited a firestorm. U.S. soldiers, heavily armed and positioned around the camp, immediately opened fire. Their rifles cracked, and the big Hotchkiss cannons on the hill began to boom, sending explosive shells into the helpless Lakota camp. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. The Lakota people, many of them unarmed, were caught in a deadly crossfire. Men, women, and children tried to run, to find shelter, but there was nowhere to hide on the open, snowy ground. Bullets ripped through the air, hitting people as they fled. Mothers clutched their babies, trying to shield them from the hail of gunfire. Old men and women, too slow to escape, fell where they stood. Chief Spotted Elk, sick and weak, was among the first to be killed. The soldiers, fueled by fear and perhaps a thirst for revenge from past battles, kept shooting. They pursued those who tried to escape, showing no mercy. The sounds of rifle fire, cannon blasts, and the screams of the dying filled the air. The peaceful camp, meant to be a place of temporary safety, became a scene of unimaginable horror. The snow turned red, stained with the blood of innocent lives. In a very short time, hundreds of Lakota people, mostly unarmed, had been killed or badly hurt. It was a dark moment, a terrible tragedy. When the gunfire finally stopped, a terrible silence fell over Wounded Knee Creek, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the cries of orphaned children. The scene was horrific. More than 250 Lakota people lay dead, many of them women and children, their bodies scattered across the snowy ground. Some estimates say the number was even higher, reaching around 300. About 50 soldiers were also killed, some by their own comrades, stray bullets in the chaos. The survivors emerged from hiding, their hearts heavy with grief and shock. Many were badly injured, bleeding in the bitter cold. There was no immediate help for them. The U.S. Army quickly left the area, leaving the dead and wounded behind. A blizzard soon swept in, covering the bodies with snow and making the suffering even worse for those who managed to crawl away. It was days before some of the dead could be properly buried, their frozen bodies gathered into a mass grave. Children who had seen their parents killed wandered lost and alone. Families were torn apart forever. The few who made it back to the Pine Ridge Agency carried not only their wounds, but also deep scars in their hearts and minds. The memory of that day, the loss of their loved ones, and the crushing injustice would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Wounded Knee left a wound that would never fully heal. After the horror of Wounded Knee, the U.S. Army had to explain what happened. Their official reports painted a very different picture from what the Lakota survivors described. The Army called it a battle, not a massacre. They said that the Lakota had started the fighting by firing the first shot, and that the soldiers had simply defended themselves. They claimed the Lakota were rebellious and dangerous, stirred up by the ghost dance. These reports often left out important details, like the fact that most of the Lakota were unarmed, or that women and children were among the dead. The powerful Hotchkiss guns, which had rained down explosive shells, were barely mentioned. Instead, the Army focused on the few Lakota men who might have had weapons, making it seem like a fair fight. 20 soldiers were even given the Medal of Honor, the highest military award, for their actions at Wounded Knee. This showed how much the government wanted to see the event as a victory, not a tragedy caused by misunderstanding and excessive force. For many years, this official story was the one told in history books, covering up the terrible truth and placing the blame squarely on the victims. It added another layer of pain to the Lakota people, who not only lost their loved ones but also had their story twisted and denied. The true story of Wounded Knee, however, could not be erased from the hearts of the Lakota people. The massacre left a deep and painful scar that would affect them for generations. It was the end of their armed resistance and the final crushing blow to their traditional way of life on the plains. The hope that the ghost dance had offered was replaced by an even deeper sorrow and a lasting sense of betrayal. For the Lakota, Wounded Knee meant more than just the loss of lives. It meant the loss of trust. How could they trust a government that promised protection but then allowed its soldiers to kill their women and children? This mistrust spread to other Native American tribes as well, who saw Wounded Knee as proof of the U.S. government's broken promises and harsh treatment. The memory of the massacre was passed down through families, a painful reminder of what they had endured. It contributed to poverty, poor health, and a feeling of hopelessness on the reservations for many years. Children grew up hearing the stories, feeling the weight of the past. The vibrant culture and spiritual practices were driven further underground, but never completely extinguished. The tragedy of Wounded Knee settled deep into the spirit of the Lakota, becoming a part of their identity and their ongoing struggle for justice and recognition. Over time, as more people learned the true details of what happened on that cold December day, Wounded Knee grew to be much more than just a single sad event. It became a powerful symbol, a harsh reminder of the many injustices Native American people suffered at the hands of the U.S. government. It stood for broken treaties, stolen lands, and the forced attempts to erase Native American cultures. For many, Wounded Knee was not simply a battle. It was the brutal end of a long and tragic struggle for survival and freedom. It showed how fear and misunderstanding could lead to terrible violence against people who were simply trying to hold on to their way of life. The site of the massacre itself became sacred ground, a place of mourning and memory. Native American activists in later years would point to Wounded Knee as a clear example of the wrongs that needed to be righted. It highlighted the vast difference between the government's promises and its actions, creating a legacy of anger and a demand for justice. Wounded Knee became a rallying cry, a point of reference for all who sought to bring attention to the unfair treatment of indigenous peoples across America. Its name still echoes as a call for truth and recognition, representing the pain of a people whose voices were silenced for too long. Even though the official story tried to hide the truth, the Lakota people never forgot Wounded Knee. They worked hard to keep the memory alive, passing down the stories from grandparents to grandchildren. This was not just about sadness. It was about honoring their ancestors and making sure that such a terrible event would never be forgotten or repeated. In more recent times, Native American groups have made strong efforts to share the real story of Wounded Knee with the whole world. They hold remembrance ceremonies at the sacred site, where people gather to pray, sing, and tell stories of what happened. These gatherings are important for healing and for showing that the Lakota spirit is still strong. Activists have also pushed for the U.S. government to take back the medals of honor given to soldiers involved in the massacre, arguing that such actions should not be celebrated. They have worked to get the truth into school books so that all children can learn about this part of American history. Through museums, books, films, and tribal histories, Native Americans continue to educate others. They want people to understand the deep pain of the past, not to dwell in anger, but to learn from mistakes and build a better, more respectful future for everyone. Their efforts are a testament to their strength and their commitment to truth. The story of Wounded Knee is a difficult one, filled with sorrow and injustice, but it is also a story that holds important lessons for all of us. By truly understanding what happened that day, and in the years leading up to it, we can learn about the dangers of fear, misunderstanding, and unchecked power. It teaches us how important it is to listen to all voices, especially those that have been silenced or ignored. Learning about Wounded Knee is not about placing blame on people today, but about recognizing the mistakes of the past. It's about seeing how racism, greed, and a lack of empathy led to terrible outcomes. This knowledge helps us to understand why Native American communities still face many challenges today, and why their fight for justice and respect continues. It encourages us to think about how we treat people who are different from us, and to challenge unfairness whenever we see it. By remembering Wounded Knee, we honor the lives lost, and commit ourselves to building a more fair and just world for everyone. It reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates, but a living lesson that can guide us toward a future where all people are treated with dignity and their cultures are valued. This, truly, is the real story of Wounded Knee.